Most people have never heard her name, but she is worth over $134 billion. She owns a massive chunk of the most powerful retail company ever built. And for years, she was living quietly on a cattle ranch in rural Texas while the rest of the world was looking somewhere else. So who is Alice Walton? And what exactly was happening on her massive Texas property? Let's find out. Chapter 1. The woman behind the fortune nobody talks about. Let's start with what most people actually know about Alice Walton, which is basically nothing. She is the daughter of Sam Walton, the man who built Walmart into the biggest retail empire the world has ever seen. She inherited a massive stake in that company alongside her brothers Rob and Jim. She collects art, she funds museums, and she stays completely out of the headlines. And she has made it very clear over several decades that she does not care whether you know any of this. No press tours, no carefully managed public image. Just a woman sitting on more money than most countries, doing exactly what she wants. And what makes her story genuinely fascinating is the scale of what she is sitting on. Because Alice Walton is not just rich, she is historically almost offensively wealthy. As of 2026, she is worth over $134 billion. That makes her the 14th wealthiest person on the entire planet. And she has held the title of the world's richest woman for 3 years in a row. Not the richest woman in Texas, not the richest woman in America. She is the richest woman on the whole planet according to Forbes. But almost nobody is talking about her. Think about that for a second. Most people at the top of the wealth list are constantly doing things to stay in the news. They are making public statements, buying social media platforms, or building massive rocket ships. Alice Walton has not done a press interview that most people could find with a basic internet search. She does not post on social media. She does not perform for an audience. She just sits on $134 billion and lives exactly how she wants. And she has been doing it quietly for decades. Now compare that to basically anyone else in the top 20 list. Other billionaires have super yachts so massive they need a separate support vessel just to carry their helicopters. Some spend hundreds of millions on compounds in Hawaii that locals spent years fighting against. Even the broader Walton family is known for sprawling estates and private jets. But Alice is different. Alice just wants her horses, her art, and to be left alone. So where does she actually live? What did she build out in the Texas dirt? And how does a woman with that kind of money end up in boots on horseback on a cattle ranch near Fort Worth instead of a penthouse overlooking the ocean? Because when you actually start digging into this, what you find is not what anyone expects. Chapter 2. Born into Walmart. Built something completely different. Alice Walton was born on October 7, 1949 in Newport, Arkansas. She was the youngest of 4 children and the only daughter. Her father was running a small five-and-dime store in Bentonville when she was growing up. And by the time she was a teenager, that little store had turned into Walmart. And Walmart was turning into something American retail had never seen before. Now you would think growing up inside that, she would go straight into the family business. Her brothers did exactly that. Rob and Jim Walton both stayed close to the company, and they are still involved today. But Alice looked at that world and she walked the other direction. She worked inside Walmart briefly as a buyer, but she decided it was not for her and she left. She graduated from Trinity University in San Antonio with a degree in economics and finance. Then she built a career in banking and investment. She was an equity analyst and a money manager. She worked as a broker at E.F. Hutton, and during that time she was often the only woman in the room during major financial discussions. Back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, that was just the reality for women trying to build serious careers in finance. But she did not make it a public issue. She just kept working. Then in 1988, she founded her own investment bank called Llama Company. She named it after an exotic pet a friend had given her to raise on a ranch. She ran it as president and CEO for a full decade. And during that time, she did something that most people in the region still remember. She played a major role in financing the Northwest Arkansas Regional Airport. She put up $15 million up front, and she underwrote nearly $80 million in bonds through her firm. The airport had already failed to pass a public vote for financing. Local business leaders were stuck with no clear path forward. Alice stepped in and she made it happen. The terminal was later renamed the Alice L. Walton Terminal Building in her honor. And that airport is now the main gateway for the entire Northwest Arkansas region. But quietly running alongside all of that professional work, she was buying art. She was doing it seriously and obsessively. People in the art world would later describe her focus as almost frightening. It started when she was just 10 years old, and she spent 5 weeks of her allowance on a print of a Picasso painting. That one decision never really stopped. It just kept growing piece by piece for the next 50 years. And eventually, that collection would become the reason she picked up and moved to Texas. Chapter 3. The World of the Rocking W Ranch. When Llama Company closed in 1998, Alice did not go back into banking. She moved to Texas and she bought land. Not a vacation spot or a weekend house. She bought 1,435 acres in Millsap, Texas. This is a small town in Parker County, about 45 miles west of Fort Worth. And she built one of the most serious cutting horse operations in the entire state. She called it the Rocking W Ranch. It sat right along the banks of the Brazos River. On that property, she built a nearly 4,000 square foot home overlooking the water. But the house was not the main event. The infrastructure for the horses was what mattered. She built a 30-stall horse barn, a covered arena, a breaking pen, and over 250 acres of pasture just for growing hay. She had more than 15 stock tanks and ponds. She had 3/4 of a mile of river frontage, and she had full water rights plus 90% of the mineral rights underground. When the ranch finally went on the market in 2015, it was listed at nearly $20 million. But she was not there to sell it. She was there to win. Now, if you do not know what cutting horse competition is, let me explain it because it is actually wild. A horse and a rider work together to separate one single cow from a herd. Then they have to hold that cow out without the rider using the reins at all. No steering and no guiding. The horse just reads the cow and responds completely on its own. It is pure athleticism and instinct built over years of training. Events like the National Cutting Horse Association Futurity pull in serious competitors and serious money. Champions at that level are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the breeders who consistently produce them become legends in the sport. Alice had a gift for spotting talent in young horses that people in that world still talk about today. She could look at a 2-month-old foal and tell you whether it had what it takes to be a champion. That skill turned the Rocking W into a powerhouse. Her horses won the NCHA Futurity in 2009. One of her horses took the Horse of the Year title back in 2004. For almost 2 decades, her operation was right at the center of the Fort Worth cutting horse scene. And that scene is the center of the sport globally. Chapter 4. The Fortune Bend Secret. And on top of all that, she also owned a second Texas ranch at the same time. This was the Fortune Bend Ranch. It was even bigger than the first one. We are talking about 4,416 acres near Possum Kingdom Lake in Palo Pinto County. It had 8.5 miles of river frontage and a massive lodge home. The views across the limestone hill country were some of the finest in the state. The asking price on that one was nearly $29 million. So at her peak in Texas, Alice Walton was sitting on nearly 6,000 acres of prime ranch land. She had hundreds of championship horses and a private world that almost nobody outside the cutting horse circuit had any real visibility into. There were no announcements and no interviews. She did not explain herself to anyone. She just lived like her father used to operate. She focused on the work and the animals, and she stayed away from the cameras. But having that much land and that much influence in rural Texas creates a very specific kind of power. You are not just a landowner. You are an economic force in the county. You provide jobs, and you support local businesses. You become a pillar of a community that most people in big cities never think about. And Alice used that power to build a life that was completely insulated from the outside world. She was the richest woman on earth, but she was spending her days in the dirt with horses. That contrast is what makes her story so different from the typical billionaire narrative. Chapter 5. The History, the Public Records Deleted. Now we have to go somewhere uncomfortable. Because if we are going to tell this story honestly, we cannot skip the parts that do not fit the philanthropic image. Alice Walton has a history with cars and law enforcement that would have ended most public figures' careers. And the way each situation got resolved tells you a lot about what $134 billion can actually do when you need it. It started back in 1983 during a trip to Mexico. She lost control of a rented Jeep and drove it straight into a ravine. Her leg was shattered so badly she had to be airlifted out of the country. She spent years recovering through more than 24 surgeries, and one of her legs has been shorter than the other ever since. According to public records, that injury became relevant again in April 1989. She was driving in Fayetteville, Arkansas, when she struck and killed a 50-year-old woman named Oleta Hardin. The victim was a worker who had stepped out onto the road. Reports said Alice was speeding at the time. But here's the part that is hard to move past. No charges were ever filed. There was no ticket and nothing on the record at all. Then in 1998, she was arrested for a DUI in Arkansas after crashing into a gas meter and a telephone booth. The responding officers reported that she asked them if they knew who she was. That charge stuck, and she paid a $925 fine. At that point, her net worth was around $6 billion. So a fine like that was completely meaningless to her. And then came October 7, 2011. It was her 62nd birthday. A Texas state trooper pulled her over in Parker County for speeding through a construction zone. He gave her a field sobriety test and she failed it. She could not walk in a straight line or touch her finger to her nose. She reportedly had trouble even keeping her head up. She refused a breathalyzer and she was arrested. She spent her birthday night in a jail cell before being released on a $1,000 bond. But watch what happened next. Her legal team moved very fast. Doctors sent letters to the court arguing that the failed tests were actually the result of her 1983 leg injury. They said her physical imbalance made her look impaired when she was not. Then the trooper who arrested her was suspended under circumstances that were never clearly explained. That made him unavailable to testify. In 2013, the district attorney quietly let the statute of limitations expire. They never prosecuted the case. And then a judge granted a petition to have every record of the arrest wiped from the files entirely. An assistant district attorney told a local news station that the records would cease to exist for them in any way. So just to recap, she had a pedestrian death with 0 charges. She had a DUI arrest that was literally deleted from the public record. And through all of it, she just kept going. She kept buying art and raising horses. That tension between the philanthropy she is celebrated for and the legal history she has never addressed sits right at the center of who she is. You cannot understand one side without knowing the other exists. Chapter 6. Building the Crystal Bridges Empire. Now here's the part that makes it impossible to judge this story too quickly. While Alice was running a horse ranch and dealing with her legal situations, she was also doing something with her fortune that most billionaires would never attempt. She was building a world-class art museum in a small Arkansas town and making it completely free for everyone. Not discounted for some people. Free for everyone, always. Crystal Bridges. Museum of American Art opened in 2011 in Bentonville. It sits on 120 acres of forest that the Walton family donated. The building was designed by a world-famous architect, and it looks like nothing else in the country. It is a series of glass and wood pavilions that bridge 2 spring-fed ponds. The Walton Family Foundation put up $800 million just to get it started. And the collection inside came from 50 years of Alice buying. With a clear plan. She spent $35 million on a single painting in 2005. She bought Norman Rockwell's Rosie the Riveter for nearly $5 million. She has works by Georgia O'Keeffe, Edward Hopper, and Mark Rothko. There are more than 3,500 pieces spanning 5 centuries of American art, and she took them out of private hands and put them on public walls in Northwest Arkansas. When the museum opened, the art world in New York and LA basically lost its mind. Critics accused her of cultural hoarding. They said she was stealing great works and hiding them in a town most people could not find on a map. Some called it the worst thing to happen to American art institutions in a generation. But by 2021, more than 5 million people had visited. And they were not just art experts flying in from the coast. They were regular families and school groups who got in for free. That was the entire point from the beginning. She wanted to give people in the middle of the country access to things they would normally have to travel thousands of miles to see. She also launched the Art Bridges Foundation to move art out of museum storage and loan it to smaller towns across the country. It now partners with over 300 museums nationwide. She has put more than $377 million into that one program alone. And right now, she is funding the Alice L. Walton School of Medicine in Bentonville. It is a nonprofit medical program built around a completely different approach to healthcare. The first class is already enrolled for 2025. Over the last decade, she has put more than $5.7 billion into these foundations. That money is not going into real estate or status symbols. It is going into things that are open to the public and built to outlast her. Whether that is genuine philanthropy or the most effective reputation management in history is a question worth asking. The answer is probably both. Chapter 7. She left Texas, but Texas never left her. In 2015, Alice put the Rocking W Ranch on the market. It was a massive sale that changed the landscape of the Texas ranching world. She sold off nearly 90 horses at an auction for about $3.2 million. A businessman who co-owns the Los Angeles Dodgers bought 11 of her top horses and even hired her former trainer to manage them. Her statement about the sale was very short. She said she loved the life, but it was time for her to focus on other things that mattered to her. She moved to Fort Worth, and she lived there quietly for a few years before heading back to Arkansas in 2020. People who saw her in Fort Worth during that time said she was almost impossible to identify as a billionaire. She would eat at a small neighborhood Italian restaurant without requesting a private table or bringing a security team. She just blended into the room. There was no visible wealth and no entourage. She was just a woman having dinner. Back in Bentonville, she settled into the old Walton family home. This is a stone manor that her parents built in 1958. She goes to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. She cooks for her family. She hikes the trails near the museum and she goes fishing. She even attends community meetings alongside neighbors who may not even realize who she is. There are gates at the entrance to the property now, but they are low-key. It is the kind of security that says keep your distance without making a big scene. She has no social media and no PR team. She has no children. She was married and divorced twice early in her life, but those marriages never got much attention because she never gave anyone a reason to look. She is 76 years old, and she seems genuinely content with a life that would look modest to most people. That is either the most disciplined person in the history of the billionaire class, or it is just what happens when your father drives a pickup truck, even when he was the richest man in the world. Chapter 8. Owning the city without the title. Some billionaires want to build a city and put their name on every building. They want the recognition and the fame. Alice Walton already owns a city. She just does not need you to know about it. Bentonville, Arkansas is a Walton city in every way that matters. The Walmart headquarters is there. The art museum is there. The medical school is being built there right now. The family compound is there. And the airport Alice personally financed back in 1998 is the only reason the region can function at its current level. When she walks through the town, she is walking through a community that exists because her family poured money into it for 60 years. But her Texas footprint was not small either. At her peak, she controlled nearly 6,000 acres of prime land. She sat on the board of major museums in Fort Worth. Her foundation backed cultural programs all over the city. She was one of the biggest names in the cutting horse world, which is a massive economic force in Texas. And the thing about influence that big is that it does not just go away when you sell the land. The Fort Worth cutting horse circuit still runs along the path she helped create. The museums she supported are still growing. Crystal Bridges permanently changed how the art world thinks about where a major museum can exist. Over 300 partner museums are now moving art across America because of the program she created. The medical school is about to change how doctors are trained in a region that had almost no presence on the national healthcare map before she decided to fix it. Alice Walton does not need her name on a city limit sign. What she built in Texas and what she is still building in Arkansas goes way deeper than any property record. It will still be there long after anyone remembers what kind of car she drove or how much money she had. She does not need a brand. And honestly, that might be the whole point of her story. She has the wealth of a small nation, but she lives with the privacy of a ghost. So what part of this story surprised you the most? Was it the scale of the Texas ranches? Or was it the way her legal history was handled by the courts? Let us know in the comments below. We want to hear what you think about the world's richest woman and the secret empire she built. And if you want more deep dives into stories like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button right now. Thank you for watching this journey into the life of Alice Walton. See you in the next video. Bye.